September 30th, 1863. Plans have changed somewhat. I have fallen in with some rough types, but it seems to be the only way to get to the West, where I can find my fortune and make my parents proud.
Welcome to Los Angeles, Mr. Fink.
It's not him! It's not Barton Fink!
Having trouble getting started.
Are you a writer, Mr. Fink?
Actually, I'm writing pictures now.
Oh, it's an exciting time.
Yes, sir, we're gonna have some high old times. Living off the land, hunting and fishing. Chores? I ain't doing no chores.
I'm sitting in the audience, the lights go down, Capitol logo comes up. Come on.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Come listen to us talk Steven Seagal and his 3-word titled movies.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 2 years. So there are some like 50-plus bonus episodes.
Lots of episodes.
Waiting for you, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about some new release films, some of which will tie into today's episode. So if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon, definitely consider doing that. And speaking of which, we had a lot of people make the jump this week, so sorry that I'm gonna have to like rip through these today, but thank you so much to Zachary Ainsley, to DH, Leonard the Comedian, Dan Spaceman, Alex Writes Loud, nice, John Cameron, Brian McNatt, Nicholas Reed. What else we got here? I think that's it. Thanks to all you guys so much for signing up for the Patreon. Hope you guys are enjoying those bonus episodes. That's the one plug for the week. And the other plug for the week, as always, is iTunes. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know you are, scroll down to the bottom. Give us a good rating and review down there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners over there. And we did get one this week that I was very happy to see. Someone who was just starting from the very beginning and announcing that they are hoping to be caught up pretty soon. That's how fast they're going through the episodes. And they also said that on top of us being fun and insightful, which I will take that compliment, they also enjoyed the cat that appears variously throughout certain episodes, which is my cat.
Yeah, the sidekick, the guest star.
She is our silent producer. She hangs out in here while we talk about sleazy movies all the time.
Right.
But that being said, those are all the plugs. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back.
Welcome back. 2 weeks ago, I think, would have been the last time you guys would have heard from us, free listeners, where we would have had a double feature of Nighthawks.
Yeah.
From 1981, starring Rutger Hauer and Sylvester Stallone.
In a dress.
We paired it. Yes, and we paired it with Night of the Juggler from 1980, which starred James Brolin, and both were very sweaty late 70s New York crime films.
Yeah.
Both very cool. We had special guest Jason Bailey, who just finished writing an entire book on New York City history and crime in regards to especially its depiction on film. So he brought those films with him as underrated gems he found while doing that. And they both mark a transition period from the sort of 1970s, sort of taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3 or Dog Day Afternoon era of New York crime filmmaking, and leading us more into the insane 80s of something more like Cobra or something.
Yeah. What a film.
But that was 2 weeks ago. If you haven't heard that one, any podcast listener of choice. And last week, for the bonus listeners, we went off of that episode because I think it was Nighthawks was directed by Bruce Malmuth, I think, who also directed Hard to Kill with Steven Seagal. So we did Hard to Kill as well as Out for Justice. The first time talking about Steven Seagal. Out for Justice, obviously, by John Flynn.
That action.
We did Rolling Thunder, and I was really impressed at how much of Rolling Thunder's just really mean, nasty violence made its way into Out for Justice, even if Steven Seagal produced it and had to do his own thing inside of a movie that doesn't really fit his thing. But that's fine. We had a fun time talking about him. He's an interesting screen presence, and the 90s was an insane time.
It really was.
So that was last week's bonus episode for anyone who didn't get a chance to check that one out. Again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. But this week, we have a very special guest joining us, as always, bringing on 2 unique films of their own. And this week, we are very pleased to say that we have writer and director Josh Trank on. Josh, how are you doing?
I'm good. I was just enjoying the podcast, and now I have to be a part of it.
Yeah, now you're in it. Sorry, man.
No. It's perfectly fine. I'm good. I'm quarantined, and just me and my little pup here.
Are you busy?
I am. I'm pretty busy. Just as busy as I've been prior to global pandemic. So I guess that's a good thing. I'm just Yeah. Well, Jamie and I can say that we covered recently Capone in our bonus transmission on the show. And it seems like, unlike a lot of other people that we spoke to about the film, we were actually pretty decent fans of it. Cool. And we saw you online kind of reacting to everyone else's reactions to your film and stuck inside while doing that. I'm sure that was a really bizarre time. It's all, you know what? It always feels like a bizarre time, no matter what. So I guess if anything, this feels more honest because it's more literally crazy as opposed to just the vibe of craziness. Like the craziness is just like real and it's happening. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely interesting, absorbing the reactions across the board, while also maintaining a position of neutrality.
I imagine that's got to be tough.
You know, it wasn't really that tough because I love the movie. So there's really nothing anybody could say to me to throw me off my zen about that. I mean,
well, I saw that some of the people were like that had critiques or whatever were even things that you were trying to get across. So it seemed like it wasn't something that you were like, well, that doesn't bother me because that's exactly what I was trying to do.
They didn't misunderstand. I made them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I if that's the reason you hate the movie, it's more about the subjectivity of what you like to consume art-wise. Like that makes sense. That's fine to me. I mean, there were so many reviews that nailed every aspect of the film and all the ways that I hoped somebody would understand the movie and appreciate it. So, you know, while you had I'd say an ample majority of critics and user reviews that complained about the film being slow and being about nothing. On the other hand, you had but on the other hand, you had a good 30 to 40% of critics and user reviews that were saying the polar opposite, saying that this movie, wow, that 116 minutes went by so quickly, and this movie was about so much at once. I need to watch it a second time. So it's I'd rather put out a movie if I'm putting out a movie that's this much from my heart. In such an uncompromising way, I'd prefer that it's the kind of movie that people either engage with completely frame by frame or are just totally turned off by. It's fine.
Well, you definitely successfully managed that one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like I set out thinking like, okay, the goal is the reaction down the line.
Yeah.
The goal was to express myself as transparently as possible with this movie in the ways that were meaningful to me. So, I've gotten a lot of messages from people saying that they watched the film with because it's funny. There's also, I've seen some reviews from some people saying how they did not appreciate the sense of humor applied to the experience of dementia as they had experienced, a parent or a grandparent suffering from that. And then at the same time, I'd get messages from people saying, hey, my father perished from, experiencing dementia, or my grandfather or grandmother. And this was a very touching experience for me because I felt it was so naked and raw in its
and personally I've seen that before too, and my experience is that it is kind of awkward and absurd. Like, sorry, that's the experience of dealing with being a family member of someone like that in a lot of cases. So
I mean, a lot of, like, for instance, so many of my my inspirations just come from my upbringing, being Jewish and being a descendant of Holocaust survivors. And, you know, a big part of our culture is gallows humor. You know, there's more comedy that's come out of the concentration camps than you can imagine. And that seems weird, but that's kind of how some people culturally just deal with life.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point, too, because I was recently listening to the Movies That Made Me podcast where they had Eli Roth on recently. And he said something similar where people were asking him about things like Hostel. And he was like, you know what, the movies that I make don't really shock me. Like, people call me a bit of a shock jock sometimes. And he was just kind of like, when you have a family that grows up like talking about genocide at the dinner table, like it's just a matter of fact thing that happened to your family. He was like, that's the way you look at the world. So he's like, my movies to me aren't shocking as much as they seem to be to other people. And he was like, it was part of his upbringing. And it was really interesting, you know, hearing that part of it, because like obviously to me I didn't have that experience, but you kind of get that a little bit now watching his films, even if people think that it is tasteless in its own way, or you know, whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I totally feel that. I mean, you know, like I think at the end of the day, if you're going to make something that makes sense to you, you just have to, again, once it's out in the world, it's important to take a stance of neutrality if that's exactly the movie that you wanted to make. Because if people are going to hate it, they're going to be offended by it, then you've just successfully contributed a piece of art to the world. That's just how it works.
And too, speaking of which, transitioning us into what we're going to be talking about today, I think the main film that you've brought with you today is partially about art being this sort of like insular thing that, you know, is, as much as you might want to try to communicate to an audience that you're disconnected from, like ultimately there is like an expression of, you know, you are in your own head and you can only express yourself as much as you can externally, you know. So but that being said, we will have you introduce the two films that you've brought with you today, and why you paired them together.
So the two films, my little double bill, my double feature, is Barton Fink by the Coen brothers and Bad Company 1972 by Robert Benton, not to be confused with the Bad Company film that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s starring Chris Rock. So I just have to make that clear, which I haven't seen, but I should. It might be better for me than this one. I don't know. But yeah, I chose these two movies for different reasons. So on the surface, if somebody were to just ask me, what are two movies that are are to my heart in a visceral way, I would say Barton Fink and Bad Company. As it also relates to films that are sort of connected spiritually and logistically, I think that these movies, although one is a movie about a frustrated young New York playwright who's trying to make sense of his life writing B pictures for Hollywood, and then a film that is basically a winding road Western about these young kids on the run from the Civil War. They actually do have quite a bit in common in terms of the artists behind the camera. So, you know, Barton Fink is obviously written and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, who are longtime collaborators since they were children. And then you have Bad Company, which is interestingly directed by Robert Benton and written by Robert Benton and David Newman, who were longtime collaborators, who wrote such classics as Kramer and Kramer. They also collaborated on the Christopher Reeve Superman movie. They also wrote and directed a film that is another one of my favorites, but in no way sort of, I think, would make sense paired up with Barton Fink, probably more like The Big Lebowski, which maybe we can come back again for another installment of this. But
for sure. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's a movie called The Late Show, starring Art Carney and Lily Tomlin. That is, again, it's one of my favorite movies. It's a movie similar to Bad Company. Not a lot of people know about it. It's a sort of dark comedy, observational comedy, throwback noir buddy film about Art Carney, who is this aging PI who's renting a room in the valley, and he ends up going down this rabbit hole, taking on a last job, trying to find the cat of sort of post-hippie Lily Tomlin in the 1970s. It's awesome. It's a great movie. Anyway,
well, I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Good pairing with Big Lebowski. But anyway, so I chose these two films, Bad Company and Barton Fink, for the two reasons. And a third reason, as I was kind of thinking about it this morning, sort of what about these two movies might sort of like kind of the reason why they've connected with me so viscerally. And it's sort of the first time I've realized this, but both films are completely unsentimental stories scored with music that is so emotional and sentimental.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I've never really thought about that before, but it just struck me this morning as I was kind of, thinking about the films in my mind.
No, that's a really important point. We'll definitely get into it, especially because I think it's a little bit more obvious in Bad Company, especially with just, the two different forms that's operating in and how those contradictions like make that film, sort of like impactful. But what Carter Burwell is doing on Barton Fink is a lot more subtle. And I didn't even pick up on it till I rewatched it twice just for the show because I just love it so much. And it wasn't until the second time that I watched it that the score really picked up for me this time. And it really expresses something that like nothing else in the film expresses.
It's so interesting because when you think about the score for Barton Fink, it's so simple. It's just a couple of notes that repeat. Mm-hmm. That play in different ways that evolve throughout the film, but it's not what you would think in like an obvious way to apply to a film about a guy who is as bizarre looking as John Turturro living in this, nightmarish apartment in Los Angeles in the 1940s, but is so poignant and beautiful and adds just such an emotional weight to it that, like you said, it's like, if it were not for that, like, I try to, a lot of the times I'll watch movies and try to imagine like, okay, well, what would it be like without the score or a different score? And, it just changes the vibe of the film so much.
No, absolutely. But that being said, I think we are going to jump right into it here. We are going to start off with Barton Fink.
Peace of mind.
Right now, the contents of your head are the property of Capitol Pictures.
Charlie, why me?
Because you don't listen!
I'm a writer.
Look upon me! A new film by Joel and Ethan Coen.
All right, so we are talking Barton Fink, the 1991 American period psychological thriller film, as written by Wikipedia there, but obviously in typical Coen Brothers fashion, bending and incorporating so many different kinds of genres that it kind of hard to describe at that point as anything that fits cleanly into any sort of box.
Definitely.
But the film, obviously written and directed by the Coen brothers. I'm sure a lot of people listening to the show will be familiar with the film. Even when it came out, it was very acclaimed. It famously took the Palme d'Or as well as Best Director and Best Actor at the Cannes Film Festival, which I believe made them change the rules so that another movie couldn't do that. The film loosely follows John Turturro, who they wrote this character for as Barton Fink, who is a renowned New York playwright who sees a lot of success in his sort of working class common man art pieces that he is putting on. And he is asked to move to New York, LA, to Hollywood, where he is being offered a gig writing B pictures for somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a week, which I'm sure in 1940 was an absurd amount of money. And the rest of the film is his experience in Hollywood and how that sort of decrepit place of production and of artistry gone to die turns into a very hellish experience for him. Yeah, that's about all I can do to summarize that. But there's obviously a huge amount to get into here. It's the fourth feature film by the Coen brothers, following up a string of just what an opening first four films. Mic drop. With opening with Blood Simple, obviously like a Texas neo-noir that obviously established the Coens' very unique blend of sort of like dark fatalistic humor, as well as sort of like existential and philosophical qualities. Also, they're very interested in sort of like people wandering sort of like machines of their own making in a way, and sort of being having impulses of self-interest and being controlled a little bit also by, some Coen brothers characters are not the smartest people.
Yeah.
And by the way, just let me say, this is such a really like spot on description of Blood Simple and just the Coens in general. So bravo. This is great. And Blood Simple just really, for me, it communicated like their artistic statement of, a minor miscommunication or impulse escalating into like a life or death situation. And especially to something that they reused in Barton Fink, because I rewatched Blood Simple recently too. All of the hums of the ceiling fans and the ambient soundscape and how that goes into like full blown like existential horror, like that is probably the thing that translates the most to Barton Fink, mixed a little bit with their period drama sensibility that they applied a little bit to the Prohibition era gangster film that they did, Miller's Crossing, which is also just one of my absolute favorites of their films. Also in the most unexpected ways, where they'll introduce that kind of sound design, like in Barton Fink at the end of the first scene, the introduction, when he's standing backstage and the cast goes out to take their bow for the applause. Yeah. And then Barton Fink walks out and they slowly start to rise up the sound of just the sort of ventilation hell sound effects. It's just so random, but and he's also got so that creepy, completely spaced outlook where you're not sure if he's like going through an episode of some kind or if he's like just entranced by his own work or whatever it is. Well, and it's worth noting too that like the opening images of this are a dolly shot on the wallpaper of the hotel where we're going to spend the majority of this film, followed by images and sounds of like the ropes and pulleys like behind the stage, like orchestrating the curtains and orchestrating the lights. And it really sets you up for like, we are going to kind of look behind the curtain at a particular in a particular way here. And it kind of combines a little bit of Preston Sturges's like Sullivan's Travels, a little bit of like The Day of the Locust. And for me, honestly, the biggest reference point for this film is weirdly enough, probably like Eraserhead. It's the only other film I feel like has that uncanny soundscape and like deliberately and the hair and sound. And it really brings also, like a loneliness too. Like it really expresses, I think, how alone he feels. I mean, when you just have him in a room and all you hear is the ceiling fan with no score or anything like that, you get that sense of I am completely by myself here. Well, yeah, and just that deliberately ambiguous, like surreal externalization of what is very clearly internal feelings and conflicts, which is also very present in, something like Polanski's Repulsion, which was also something that they talked about a lot when they were making this film, of like just an impressionist, like solitary psychic breakdown. It's all like mundane details, sound design. I think in that film, they also even have like the walls like literally crumbling and fissuring as like a representation of like the psychological state, which is something here we get with the wallpaper like peeling off and revealing like this weird like fleshy pussy like underbelly that is like just barely being covered over with some paper, which an allegory for Hollywood if I've ever seen one.
But most fascinating, I think, about this is that the Coens have talked about it a lot, but this film came out of a rut that they were experiencing while writing the film Miller's Crossing, which a lot of people will know came out actually 1 year before Barton Fink. So while they were stuck in writing their gangster film, which is filled with all kinds of backstabbing and double crossing in a way that is almost comedic, but is still filled with like this idea of like our bleak attempts at having like moral codes and the people who survive are maybe just the best at manipulating them and things like that. So while they were writing that film, they got into they didn't describe it as writer's block, but it sounds a lot like writer's block is what they were experiencing. And apparently they stuck themselves up in a motel and they described it as they burped Barton Fink out. So it came from a very isolated experience of a writer's trapped in a hotel room being like, we need to express something. We need to get something out of our system. And they basically made a film that captures that feeling absolutely to a T.
And also being extremely Jewish.
Yes, I
don't know. Am I the only Hebe on the line right now?
At the moment, but I will say.
Okay, so I can say that. If you guys said that, I wouldn't be offended because I feel like we're all friends at this point. But I can say that because this is the thing. So I first saw Barton Fink when I was 8 years old, 9 years old.
Okay.
I know it was before I was double digits. And I didn't understand it at all when I first saw it. Are you either of you aware of something called the Z Channel?
No, actually.
Okay. So the Z Channel is very important to LA cinephile history. So the Z Channel was basically, I guess you'd describe it as like a public access station that was owned by this very wealthy guy who I think came from family money. And he was super eccentric and had a very, very huge collection of movies, like avant-garde movies and European New Wave films. And so my dad, this was in LA in the late 70s, early 80s. You'll have to fact check me on that. But anybody who lived in LA during that time period who was super into movies, they were obsessed with the Z Channel. As if you imagine like sort of the Criterion Collection or something like that, it existed as a public access station like in the early days. Okay. So my dad used to, he started on this obsessive thing where he would record on VHS 8-hour long play tapes, which was like not the best quality to record an 8-hour long play, but he'd record basically every single movie that played on the Z Channel and he'd catalog them because my dad's a huge film buff. So my dad, when I was growing up, there was this closet wherever we moved, there would be one closet that would just be dedicated to all the VHS tapes. So Barton Fink came out after the Z Channel, but Barton Fink definitely fell in line with the sort of lineage of what the Z Channel had to offer. Mm-hmm. So my dad had recorded the movie at some point, so I just picked it up and watched it. And as somebody who grew up in such a Jewish family that my dad actually makes Holocaust documentaries for a living, in my life, I had never, ever, ever seen a person look so Jewish in a movie before. So it stayed with me. And I always went to rewatch it because it just, again, I'd never seen somebody look so Jewish in a film. And it made me feel like I was seen, as the kids say.
I also don't like the movie. Like a lot of these characters, mostly the Hollywood executives and the presidents are extremely anti-Semitic and just like yelling out all the
self-loathing Jews. Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, he goes, you lousy kike son of a bitch.
Yeah, I think
is one of the most powerful and from literally one of the most Jewish-looking men you could cast next to a Jewish-looking John Turturro to say such a line.
Yeah, Michael Lerner, I think, is the one who has that line.
Oh, no, yeah, Michael Lerner. But, like, he's just... He could not be more Jewish as a studio executive with the most angry, homicidal look in his eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually
say it full volume. He just it just comes out of him with such a quiet rage.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and I was showing the film for the first time to my girlfriend, who is Jewish, and when obviously I celebrate a lot of the holidays with them, and I go to a lot of her family gatherings, and her mom is a Holocaust educator, so she's very knowledgeable about all of the stuff. And that scene where Michael Lerner drops the cape, like viscerally impacted her while she was watching the film. And then especially too, there's the anti-Semitic detectives who talk about the hotel not being restricted.
By the way, one of the most real moments, if you're Jewish and you had parents that grew up in America back in the 1940s or 50s or 60s, like that's such a real moment. Like there's just, and they followed that up, by the way, with the sort of with the Serious Man. But I'm sorry, continue. That is some real shit.
No, yeah, for sure. And the way that because I mean, they did set it just on the precipice of America joining World War II. I think America decides to join World War II in the middle of the movie, which is where we get the USO show. It's where we get the Hollywood producer in like a military general outfit that he just stole from like the set of a movie, presumably.
Yes, exactly. By the end of the movie is like, I'm now the general.
Yeah, but I found, honestly, that the things that were the most impactful was obviously how, a lot of the times you can... you feel like Barton is being welcomed in, but he's also being, sort of held away. And he does have some anxieties clearly about the World War II happening in the background, obviously. But the way that I found it sort of like the most eerie, I think, was how it just so subtly infuses with the rest of his anxieties, because obviously he has artistic anxieties. He has anxieties obviously about the industry that he's a part of, and he also has more like philosophical ones. He has pretensions of wanting to deliver a new form of working class art by and for the people,
without actually listening to the common man.
Yeah, he's like, brother. He's like, oh brother, I've got stories. Yeah. Anyway.
He has to do that at least 5 or 6 times in the film. Yeah, well, and from what I understand too, the film is a little bit based on Clifford Odets, who is the socially conscious 1930s playwright who spent a little bit of time in Hollywood. He was one of the founding members of what I think they called the group theater, which was the idea of trying to recreate through theater the actual human experience of poverty and things like this. But also a little bit inspired by William Faulkner, who obviously also had a brief stint in Hollywood, and from what I understand, actually literally wrote a wrestling picture for the same actor Barton's writing a wrestling picture for, called Flesh, from 1932.
Who's the William Montague character supposed to be? I forgot.
The Mayhew, the drunk.
Yeah, Mayhew. I'm sorry, Mayhew.
Yeah, no, yeah. He is supposed to be a little bit of William Faulkner, who was apparently a known alcoholic, and also being a Southern novelist who is invited to write movies for Hollywood as well. But they have also said that the more abusive elements of that character, that they were just we don't know if that's anything about Faulkner. We just used him as a kind of gateway for the overall experience of writers who wrote plays and novels, moving into Hollywood and finding themselves in a very different mode of writing that has a lot of sort of industry things imposed on them, and sort of the psychological experience of moving to that mode of artistry. And then especially here too, the way that sort of turns into Barton's entire surroundings. When he stays in this hotel, and it's worth noting too, he stays in this rundown hotel specifically because he wants to be more with the people. He doesn't want to have a nice, lavish hotel paid for him by the studio because he feels it will sort of separate him from his art.
Also, by the way, as I'm legally allowed to point out, very Jewish. He was saving money.
Yeah. fair enough. But also this hotel, because of the way that obviously the Coens and Roger Deakins, who they were working with for the first time on this film, the way that they shoot this film, it really gave me that Overlook Hotel, The Shining kind of vibe, where it's just something like something so ordinary. When we did The Shining on the show, we talked about the thing that's so terrifying about that film is how he doesn't really need special lighting or special angles to make that place scary. He just takes the ordinary and makes it so surreal and eerie by making it take on like this strange labyrinth kind of quality to it. And I mean, in this film, we have that wallpaper literally peeling off of it. I love in the sound design when he first arrives at the hotel and he rings that bell, and that bell just keeps ringing throughout the whole hotel for like 30 seconds until Chet, Steve Buscemi, literally seems to come out of the earth into the hotel and then stops the bell from ringing.
There's also this big, like, almost ghostly element to it where they have all the shoes in the hallway all the time, and I don't think you ever once, maybe there's one little glimpse of somebody, but you never see the other people that are in the hotel.
Oh, ever.
So
never.
There's this uneasy, ghostly feeling about it too. It's very haunting.
Yeah, the only people you see in the hotel are the elevator operator, Chet, and then obviously John Goodman's insurance salesman, Charlie.
Yeah, and the elevator guy even has like one sentence he says over and over again or something.
Next stop, 6th floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the implication, the only implication we have of people existing in this hotel is obviously sounds of crying. Sometimes that happens in rooms. Sounds of sex that sometimes happening in rooms, and then obviously, as you mentioned it, the shoes, Jamie.
Yeah.
And it kind of implies that maybe there's a whole other bunch of traveling salesmen and failed writers and other people having similar experiences in this hotel. It's worth noting that Barton also at one point. Is probably heard having sex and crying in his room, which are the two things that he hears happening in the other rooms. But the shoes are also kind of evocative of Holocaust images that I've seen, where you have lots of, you will see that like a lot of things that were left over were just the shoes that these people owned, and they were like piled up and left there. So I found that image really eerie when he looks out into the hall and he just sees people defined as like these, just the shoes that they own, which they're obviously leaving out for Chet to.
It's funny though. I have to say something that I love about the Coen brothers is every time that they're interviewed, there is one very famous incident. In fact, when Elvis Mitchell interviewed them years ago on stage for some event, I don't remember. Whenever they're being asked about the very deeper meanings of their films and all the symbolism, they'll just be like, sure. They left the shoes outside. But that's not me. I think low key, it's a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense. But I love how, of course, like, because their movies are so immaculate and are so perfect in the ways that they exist, they can be completely condescending about answers to questions, and critics and fans alike are just kind of like, oh, that's cute.
Well, I will say beyond like sort of like subtle images that people have their own reactions to, because I will say I pulled that reaction from my own girlfriend's reaction. She's more familiar with Holocaust images than I am personally, but like this is one of the few films that I watch that is so deliberately, you can feel that ambiguity that they're going for. And this is one of the few films that I am calmed by telling you that at a certain point, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. That I am actually very cool with accepting that this is a mysterious.
I have a question.
Film and experience.
How old are you guys?
I'm 28.
26.
As you get older, the movie is going to make sense more and more and more, especially I don't mean that in a bad way, because I've talked to this to therapists. I've talked about this to therapists. I've talked about this to friends. Like, every year of my life, the movie makes more and more sense to me. The first time I ever watched Barton Fink, it made fucking no sense to me. I was 8-9 years old, and I'm like, who is this extremely Jewish man on the screen? And that was my first pull into the film. And as the years have gone on, I mean, the movie now makes complete sense to me in a way that's almost frightening. For instance, you were bringing up, in the first scene of the film when he's just kind of staring off at the crowd, and you're kind of wondering, like, what is he even thinking about? Mm-hmm. For me, I watch that movie now and I know exactly what he's thinking. He is in deep, deep pain and frustration and embarrassment over the fact that all of the wrong people love this piece of art about the common man.
Yeah.
That he, has literally removed himself from society, from that aspect of society to write about. He hates the people that are applauding the film. He hates them.
Right.
And it hurts him that they're the ones who are watching it on opening night.
Yeah,
he hates them.
And then when the next scene, thing, right?
Well, no, he just hates the crowd.
But doesn't he mention when he's talking to the critics?
For instance, like in the next scene when he goes to a restaurant and he sits down with those patrons.
Right.
And there's this long passage where I forget what the guy does, but the guy's a Barton.
Yeah.
He's sitting there, and the two rich patrons who are
and he reads them the glowing review.
Yeah, they live in the Upper East Side. They have no fucking idea what it's about, but they're just happy that it's a success. And they're like, they don't even have an opinion of what it is that he did, that he poured his heart into, that has probably led to so many sleepless nights and harrowing experiences of his own personal life leading up to this opening of this play. And they're just like, oh, let's hear the review so we can hear how great it's supposed to be, because they don't get it. So when he's standing there backstage, he's hearing the applause of a bunch of people who just truly don't get it and who it is not really for at the end of the day.
Well, and also too, he's kind of like wincing while he's hearing the lines being read a little bit too. There is this thing about like just even the pain of like not being in full control of it, almost in a way, exactly. that it exists as its own thing outside of him now.
Well, he's writing art about the common man that exists purely for the spectacle of high society.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he's invited to go out to LA to write B movies to be consumed by the common man.
Yes. Yeah, which is one thing I thought was really interesting when they detail that when he first talks to John Goodman, and John Goodman like knows the actors and knows all the films he's talking about, and because he's seen them all. So it's like John Goodman is more likely going to see your art.
He's a source for like what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, like John Goodman's character, the traveling insurance salesman, is like more likely to engage with him as an artist if he made a B picture than if he was to have a play in New York. He would just be something he would never get the opportunity to see.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that it gets into his sort of, his artistic goals and process in that way, because obviously that is to him in contradiction with the work that he's being given by Hollywood, and which is what kind of like sparks this sort of like breakdown that he has a little bit.
I hate to be as pretentious as Barton Fink, but if you indulge me for a moment.
For sure.
So when Chronicle came out, the look on Barton Fink's face when the crowd is applauding is how I felt when the crowd was applauding for Chronicle, because I felt that they were applauding and reviewing a film based off of the merits of ideas that were the least personal aspects to me. Cool teenagers having fun with cool powers. Whee! I made a movie about bullying and child abuse.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm seeing all these glowing reviews talking about,
it's like a superhero movie kind of thing.
It's so sick. To me, it's not a fucking superhero movie.
Absolutely.
And I'll say it. Fuck Max Landis. He had nothing to do with the movie. He wrote a draft of the film.
I was going to ask you, but I was almost afraid. That's amazing.
I've gone on my ticker tape parade, finally to tell everybody how Chronicle was actually written and where it actually came from. Max wrote a draft. He fucking, glommed himself onto the movie.
Yeah,
so
I
let's finally take him out of the equation. This was that was a film that came from my heart.
Profile.
Well, I will say this.
You mentioned something about
just so you know, it's like I have certain rules about life. I'm not, if you're going to go out and spread lies about me, I I'm not going to spend the energy to go out and try to undo the lies unless they are legally pertinent. You know, like it's just whatever. If you want to think that I didn't come up with that movie for years of my life, I literally don't care. It's the first movie I made. I'm going to make 500 movies.
Right.
You know, and the fact that Max was an extremely loud person on social media for however many years.
Until he wasn't allowed to be.
Yeah, and I'm just like, well, if I say anything right now, I'm just going to look like a bitter asshole because he's out here thriving and selling scripts, and I'm just somebody who everybody isn't quite sure how to feel about yet, you know? So anyway, but that said, you know, this was a film that I had lived with in my soul for so many years. So when I saw these great glowing reviews, which it's like the dream of any filmmaker, especially for their first film, is for it to be a success and for the critics to love it. I had felt that they loved it for all the reasons that I just made me unsure how to talk to people about it. Because that's not what drove me every single day. I thought I was touching on sort of the core of an experience of peer and parental abuse. Yeah. That if, you know, given these telekinetic powers in this very sort of organic evolutionary way would turn into a nightmare for everybody at the hands of Dan DeHaan's character, Andrew. That was not really discussed a lot in any of the reviews. And I just kind of felt this existential dread, you know, like, again, you know, if I didn't care, then I would be the kind of director that wouldn't have ended up making falling on the sword for his version of Fantastic Four. I would have gone off and done whatever the fuck anybody wanted me to do. Which, by the way, at this point sounds kind of nice because I'd like to just like go out there and, you know, sort of make money and live a life. I'm 36 at this point, for fuck's sake. But, no,
I'm glad these are the feelings you feel while watching Barton Fink.
But I mean, but the thing is, Barton Fink is such an influential person to me, such an influential character because I feel like him a lot. I mean, you know, whether or not it's the one thing, you know, when the movie ends, it's hard to tell, you know, whether or not the Coens truly feel like they're connected to this character or if he's just sort of like an expression of, you know, their experience in some very specific, cynical way. But I, as somebody who just grew up watching that movie, I feel a lot in common with that character. And I look back on that character and I feel a little bit less in common with him now as I've grown up. But at the time, you know, like every year of my life, especially once I had made my first movie, Barton Fink is the only movie in my life that just like started to evolve deeper in a way that made sense to me, in a way that no other movie has ever made sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. Now, are you living surrealist sequences that blur reality and fantasy?
Yeah.
I made a floating mosquito in your room that won't leave.
Yeah, and then I made Fonzo. That's why.
I will say, after watching your Capone film there, and then watching Barton Fink, I was like, oh, dude. I could see it. I was like, I could see your love for this film everywhere, all over that movie when I finally ended up watching this one again. And just the way that it merges all of the different genres together, because this even has a little bit of a turn into the noir with the detectives. It eventually turns into a little bit of a serial killer horror film at a certain point. It has that 30s period sort of like Art Deco kind of look to it. And then it gets into some of the really bleak comedy. And I gotta say, while I was watching this, I couldn't help but notice that Michael Lerner's character has a statue of Atlas in his office.
Yep. So
did I catch that right?
Yeah. So and this is the thing too, you know, we're a couple of, you know, film freaks. Like, we love film. We're into like weird things and all kinds of stuff. Like, if you showed Barton Fink to the same exact amount of people that clicked, you know, purchase on Capone 2 weeks ago, I wonder what the reviews would be. I wonder what the reactions would be.
A back to back.
I feel like, and this is, my very subtle burn at critics, but it's not, again, it's all subjective. I think there's a lot of movies like The Shining, Clockwork Orange, Barton Fink, Blood Simple, Miller's Crossing. These are movies that I think a lot of critics today, they look back on with a sort of informed nostalgia of like, these are great films. But when these movies, other than Barton Fink is an exception to the rule. Barton Fink is a truly brilliant film that covers a lot of things very, very, in a very mature way that I'm not at in my life. But in terms of like, especially The Shining or Clockwork Orange, these were movies that were hated when they came out. Hated. The critics hated them. The smartest critics hated these movies.
Yeah, 100%.
Audiences were angry. I mean, part of the reason why Stanley Kubrick ended up moving to England and making the rest of his movies in England, including Full Metal Jacket, which was shot in England. That's why fucking Full Metal Jacket doesn't look like Vietnam.
He had to ship all those trees in.
Yeah, the reason is because he fled for his life because people wanted to kill him after A Clockwork Orange. So it's like a lot of people kind of forget, or I think sort of look back on movies and forget that like a lot of movies that are great today have sort of caught up with us because of the young people that watch those films without any sense of what the adult consensus meant, and just it meant a lot to them. So to me, when I'm thinking about movies in general, I'm like, okay, well, how is this going to affect a 7 or an 8-year-old who's watching it and it doesn't make sense to them yet, And again, I don't know. I don't have any super delusions of grandeur, but you sort of have to if you're going to, try to be a filmmaker, I think. That
Barton's got him. He does.
Yeah, what I'm making is, the Barton Fink at the age that I watched it, when it made no sense to me, set me off on a path in my life. I made this movie for some kid who's 8 or 9 years old who will be set off on a path on their life. Yeah. That's it. I don't care about the majority of the critics or the user reviews. It's not for them.
Yeah, 100%.
That's fair. Well, no, and I think part of the film too is like you can tell a little bit of like the Coens having a little bit of a reaction like that. Like this is clearly a lot of pent up frustrations of artistically of their own, and also working within the system. And I feel like you do get a real portrait of an artist's frustration and inertia and almost nausea is what you feel at a certain point watching this film. And it definitely feels like, I mean, at one point Barton is complaining about empty formalism to John Goodman, which is just obviously it's a set of words he absolutely wouldn't even understand. So it's hilarious that he's going on his artistic screed towards John Goodman in the first place. But it is also a critique that a lot of the time that they were lauded with. So it's very clear that they are having a reaction here and being a little bit of the experience. I think, I mean, I can't say because I haven't tried to get a movie made, so you would know it all better. But there's just such a deep frustration I feel watching this film and part of it is the way that they've shot it and the way that they've sort of written it to be sort of symbolic and ambiguous in ways that they feel they've described as more organic, that, as Josh pointed out, they didn't actually really come through and say we wanted everything like this to mean something in a puzzle piece that you can unlock and you can put it all together. This was more just a raw expression of conflict and feeling within this, but externalized into what eventually is like apocalyptic hellfire.
Yeah, and even that portrayal of like him going to Hollywood, and for the first, really until the end of the movie, that president and the executive are pretty much just like sucking his dick. Like they're at one point they literally lick his boot. The one guy, or kisses his foot. Yeah. And it's just I found that intriguing that it's like they were just kind of, feeding him what he needed to hear, and then at the very end they just crush it and are basically like, there's 20 of you, we don't need you at all in any way, shape, or form.
They didn't even see the play. They didn't even see the play. They just heard about it, that it was.
We want that Barton Fink feeling, is what they say.
When I was making Fantastic Four and in the early stages, the one thing that I kept hearing, and it was so eerie for me, it really sent me down a path of just like existential meltdown, considering my love for Barton Fink, is they kept saying, every time I pitch an idea that didn't quite make sense to the executives or the head of the studio, I would hear back, yeah, but what we want is Josh Trank's Fantastic Four. We want that Josh Trank movie.
Oh my God.
I just kept thinking, like, this is what the Coens were telling me early on.
Yeah, wow.
They wanted that Barton Fink feeling. And there's, they can get 20 other Barton Finks in here, 20 other Josh Tranks to do exactly what it is that they were looking for. They wanted that fun shit with powers. They wanted the wish fulfillment. They didn't want all the other stuff that.
Well, really and it's funny too. By the end of the film, he does end up actually, getting something artistically inspired out, and he writes it, and it is immediately dismissed as, I think he calls it, a fruity film about suffering.
Yeah.
Which if that is not an exact note that the Coen brothers got, I can't imagine like what else. Like that would I imagine that's exactly what someone said to them when they tried to turn in a draft for A Serious Man. They were like,
I've heard that. Oh no, not by the time they made A Serious Man. That was the era when basically Scott Rudin was like, okay, whatever you want to make.
Okay, but it perfectly describes A Serious Man. Like that is a
right.
Be hardcore, just about a man's suffering, and you just have to watch it, which is a kind of film that I would very much like, but I would understand why the Suits might have that note for him and not appreciate it.
100%. Yeah. How was it? What were their faces like when you told them that Tom Hardy was going to shit himself a bunch of times?
Well, it was already in the script, so
okay. So they knew. They were well aware.
Yeah, the movie is exactly the script, and so Tom had signed on to the movie before we got financing, so at that point it was sort of like, well,
yeah,
Tom is here for the pooping, so you want to tell him there's no poops, then go ahead.
He's on board, he's committed, he's attached,
very committed actor. Love
it. One thing, going back to Barton Fink here for a second, one thing that really stands out to me, I think, about Barton Fink is the visual style of it, which we haven't got a chance to praise Roger Deakins accordingly yet. Not that anyone needs to anymore, because he obviously is. He's now won his Oscar. He's now going to win Oscar after Oscar for everything that he does now, because he went so long without getting one. But one thing that watching Barton again that really stood out to me about this is just how sweaty and shadowy and claustrophobic the close-ups are of this film, and how often it uses like these off-kilter, like low angle and overhead compositions of the hotel. Barton stuck inside of his room, which is like obviously sort of like decaying, but it's in direct opposition to a lot of the venues that he goes to in Hollywood, which are obviously like these really pristine offices and restaurants. But you still, even when the locations are nicer, the overall feeling is suffocation, I feel like, while watching this film.
Yeah,
he's a lot of the feelings that
he's very gray and desaturated, and you have him set against these oversaturated sort of Los Angeles palm tree landscapes.
And all the texture and the detail of both, like a lot of the images and production design, but also like obviously the sound design as well. You spend a lot of this film just listening to fans and bed springs and phone ringing and like the clicking of the typewriter, and sort of like the look of like I watched like the brownish golden overall sort of like palette of the film, and I watch it now and I just imagine like chipped pieces of wood. This is just like the vibe it gives me, even when that's not on screen. That's just all that I see.
For sure.
Right.
And so having him, what I guess you would describe as a lot of these details are supposed to contribute to what I guess you would describe as realism. Like they would be like, they're just so detailed to like sort of like the tangible reality of the room that he's in, but they are so weaponized in a surrealist fashion after a certain point, just in terms of the montage, in terms of the overall form. And for me, it ends up ultimately becoming a movie about blurring sort of reality and fantasy, which they achieve in a lot of the ways, which obviously is a little bit of a critique of Hollywood, that there is like this very rickety facade that is being just barely covered up, all of these like contradictions and psychosis things that are happening just underneath it.
Even speaking on like just the facade of it all, like at the end when the president gets the medals on his like his custom made army general outfit or whatever, and it's not even legit, like he's just kind of playing the part, that kind of thing. Like it's just this idea of, you know, a person totally full of shit. Well, and the way I think that the Coens have crafted it here to, you know, just deliberately again be sort of ambiguous and a little bit frustrating in a certain sense, because that's the experience that they were going through. They've always talked about it too, that when people asked them about it, they were just like, it is always artificial to talk about reality with regards to this film. Like we didn't really have that in mind. They had like a headspace. They had a point of view. They had these sort of unresolved feelings of anxiety and tension, which leads you to wonder, you know, for a lot of people who have seen the film, obviously, like, is Goodman really there? Is all of this really there? Yeah, I mean,
the conclusion is that it doesn't matter. And I think that part of the biggest problem that I have with sort of, you know, I guess your sort of typical bougie Western, you know, POV of film criticism is this desperate, arbitrary need to understand what is literal and what is not literal.
Exactly.
And, you know, if this is going to be surreal, then, you know, it should be shot in a surreal way. And I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like, you're absolutely
the
right.
reason why I made Fonzo / Capone the way that I did, without any stylistic difference between who is perceived as real and who is not perceived as real, and what experiences are real and what experiences are not supposed to be real, is that it doesn't matter. This is the world that this character sees it, and that's all you need to know.
That is the experience regardless, you know?
Like, and you have most people who watch movies today, and they almost need to know what the genre classification of the movie is in order to know how to properly enjoy it. It's quite sad, but that's why I don't spend too much time thinking about what other people think about anything.
It's like, Josh and I talk about it all the time, where it's like a lot of, I mean, you know, like YouTube reviews especially are these things where it's like the lists of just everything wrong with the movie, that kind of shit. It's all very just superficial. It's just like superficial bullshit.
It's so anti-art, it's so anti-film, and absolutely. It's like what I just sort of say, these are like grifters, you know, like I'm always happy to know that people can go make a living, because I've had my ups and downs in my life for sure, you know. I've definitely, I mean, especially the last 5 years of my life, I've been fucking broke, like beyond broke, and I always think like the worst thing that you could ever wish upon somebody is to not be able to make a living. So even if somebody's out there, a snake oil salesman, and they're like, you know, fucking duping people into buying some miracle toxin that's going to, like, you know, solve their cancer, like, whatever. If somebody's out there dumb enough to buy it, then I'm glad that somebody can be making a living off of that and paying the bills and be able to, like, survive. Just to the same degree that there's the cinema sins and the kind of stuff like that. It's a grift. It's exploiting the existence of art in order to just sort of get the attention of the most sort of reductive, time wasting things that mark what, you know, YouTube or the internet are for people.
Yeah, there's like, the same conversation happens in like music. Like we'll get into, I'm from a metal background, and the conversations that like these people have about subgenres and genres are just ridiculous. It's like, can we talk about the actual song, the music?
Oh yeah, sure. When they're just like, this is like mathcore.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, it's metal.
What the
just
fuck
shut up.
Are you talking about mathcore? Shut the fuck up.
Exactly.
It's fucking music. It's just the way that the dude is playing the drums. Shut up.
Well, It's so weird to me that people would have this like puzzle box viewing experience of this film, because the symbols are there, and I do understand that people some people can be made uncomfortable by unresolved things like that, but the whole point of like what the Coens are getting at with this is that it is that experience of like, this is there is a feelings of like fraudulence that he has, and feelings of like when you create a world and what is objective and subjective, because like Barton has obviously these ideas of like objectively creating an art for the working people, but in order to do that he needs to work within an industry that, you know, sort of can't make that subjectively possible. So you get into this weird thing where like the actual film itself is interrogating art being a kind of insular thing and an expression and something that exists sort of in his head in a way, and which is why it makes sense that as an artist he would be sort of trapped in it, imprisoned in it in that way, and the way the film captures that. I mean, this is a film that opens with the inner workings of sort of how the art gets made, and then ends on him existing like sort of like within a picture.
Well, yeah, I mean, but just like you said, the and that's so spot on, man. But like it's what you just said about how it's understandable that art, a piece of art leaving audiences uncomfortable because of these unresolved themes or unresolved ideas. That's what life is. Yeah. Let's take art out of the equation. When you lose somebody in your life, somebody dies, your mother, your father, your friend, whomever, what's the thing that everybody says when somebody dies too soon or somebody dies in such a way? It's like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, wish I got to say something, makes you, like something left is unfinished.
But it makes you wonder, like, is that if death ultimately doesn't make sense, life doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And we spend our entire lives consumed and obsessed with this notion of trying to make sense of life. But at a certain point, you're going to die in some untimely way that, John
it doesn't
Goodman
might cut your head off.
When somebody dies, but when somebody dies at like the age of 98, the thing everybody resolves to a point of comfort is like, well, it was a long life. Yeah, but you know what? Wouldn't it be great if you just didn't die? Like life doesn't make sense. Life is an unresolved experience. There's no way to resolve life. We're here, we show up, and we fucking die, and it's not going to make sense to us. Yeah. And if I think there's this a large majority of people who go to the movies, it's a way to either escape from life, the life that doesn't make sense, or a way to make sense of life that doesn't exist, that doesn't make sense. And I would argue that there's a version of art that just reflects life as it is. And that to me is comforting. I am comforted by art that touches upon the experience of an unresolved life, because it makes me closer to the human experience. So I look at a movie like Barton Fink, and we're sitting here and talking about it in hyper detail, right? That you could show this same movie to somebody else who doesn't care about movies, doesn't care about the history of Hollywood, doesn't care about all these themes. And they would be like, what is this movie about? It's about nothing, but it could be about everything at the same time to somebody else.
It's a fruity movie about suffering.
Exactly. Wow.
There it is.
Tagline. That's the tagline.
That should have been the tagline. That's amazing.
That was fucking brilliant. Holy shit.
Wrapped it up real nice. That was awesome.
Well, I know you guys have a limited time, and I don't want to take you away from Bad Company.
We're going to quickly hit the reductive rating round, which on this show, I know you don't like your ratings, Josh, but this is where we always do a little bit of a rating. Well, but we have to do the rating because
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10.
That's for me. This one absolutely gets the 5 for me, because we do out of 5. So 10 out of 10. Josh gives it a 5. I give it a 5, but mostly because this was actually one of the earliest films I saw right before I decided to go to film school.
Okay.
And I gotta say, like, this was a film that like reinvented what I thought like films could look like. Like when I watched it, I had no idea that a film could be made like this. And again, I also had no understanding for it. And I've picked up on little details here and there that gets me a bit more into it. My favorite detail personally is how many times the word head is said in this movie. I think it's 50 or 60 times they say the word head, which is yes. Which blew my mind when I went and looked it up. Yeah, because there's so many of like John Goodman being like, Barton, you've got a head on your shoulders, or the conversation too where they talk about how much their heads hurt, or he's talking about when he has the pus in his ears and he's like, I asked the doctor, I can't get another head. I'm dealing with this one. So they say head like 50 times in this film, which obviously sets up a little bit of John Goodman literally possibly decapitating people and leaving them in boxes for Barton, but also the experience of an entire movie inside someone's head, like
the life of the and it's not even, they don't say the life of the head, it's the life of the mind.
Yes. the life of the mind, which is what John Goodman runs down the hall yelling as
I will show you the life of the mind.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, worth noting, there is a deleted scene that I caught of this film that has the John Goodman decapitating the elevator operator.
No,
really?
I didn't see that. What are you talking about?
Yeah, there's a delete. I have the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, and they
No, I've never seen
scenes.
that.
That's
I've
crazy.
seen this movie. I've seen this movie over 200 times at least. I've never seen that.
Yeah,
Wow.
when the detectives are looking down the hallway at John John Goodman, who comes out of the elevator.
What?
Before John Goodman comes out of the elevator operator stumbles out first, and he falls down, and his head rolls right off and bleeds all over the carpet. That's what they see before.
God.
Oh my God. Okay, I have to go look this up.
I guess they thought that was just too much or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think as far as an artistic statement by the Coens and an external realization of and surrealist realization of just like these really subjective pent up anxieties, both personally, worldly, industrially, artistically. This is just like a towering film for me, and it completely shaped how I would think about films, because I've always been someone who has looked at and been very very focused on the way that directors say things wordlessly, the way that they viscerally express themselves using, shots and cuts, and the way that those impact you as honestly more important to the story than, what two people say to each other, because there is more said in individual compositions and dolly shots and, sort of compositional expressions in this film than could ever be said by Barton Fink directly. And I think people who watch this film and they go, oh, he made a deal with the devil or something, and John Goodman is getting him for that or something. And it's just this weird thing of, I couldn't imagine watching a movie this way. This is just an amazing expression of these really deep anxieties, and the way that I feel, the way that I watch this and I end up thinking more of like something like Eraserhead, I think speaks to what the Coens are going for with this film.
Yeah, for sure.
Than any of sort of like the genre trappings they try to get, people try to box them into. Like a lot of the time they get like a lot of people sometimes talk about this in the context of noir or like buddy comedy and stuff like that. And it's just not the feeling that I get while watching it. So as far as like impressionist, like psychic breakdown films go, I feel like this has got to be a top 5 for everyone.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's for me. I did have it at the high 4 just because I'm less experienced in film theory and the understanding filmmaking and stuff like that. I've kind of latched on to Josh a little bit here with this show, and I've learned quite a bit. But this is the second time.
By the way, I know nothing about. I'm not into film theory or anything like that. I go with my gut.
Yeah, and I don't shun. I kind of have to be that way, just because I do have a total lack of understanding in a sense. But this was the second time that I watched this film, and the first time I watched it, I really did enjoy it, but I did have a little bit of trouble with it. It was, I'd say, like 5 years ago or something when I was into film, but hadn't watched many, to be honest. But with this this watch and this conversation, I will say it's really expanded my understanding of what they're doing, especially with just Barton Fink's character in general. So I'm kind of crossed, but I think I'm going to wait until the rewatch, but I feel like this is going to be, I'll consider this a masterpiece. I just feel like I'm getting closer and closer to really understanding it. So yeah, right now.
Can I point out one thing why I think it might qualify as a masterpiece?
For sure.
In a way, from a filmmaker's point of view, where I, obviously want to set out to hit every note possible with anything I do, whether it's weird or whatever. And I don't know if I have. I don't think I have yet. But the scene when John Goodman, in about almost halfway through the movie, tells John Turturro that he's going to have to head out of town for a bit. The way that John Turturro reacts to him after the arc of their friendship, like this guy is his friend now. At first, he didn't like him. He thought he was obnoxious, and then they became friends. John Turturro's so heartbroken when John Goodman says that he has to leave town. Like, he's really, really on such just a basic human level, heartbroken and sad for a guy who is, shown himself to us as this like super pretentious New York writer who's just like above kind of everything, but at the same time thinks he is so connected to the common man. But like, he is such a common man moment. He's just sad. Like, he's going to miss his buddy.
Yeah.
To me, that qualifies it as such a masterpiece, because it is such a, like, I don't care if, somebody doesn't get this movie or all these ideas and the film theory is not for them. This is a movie that contains just the most basic feelings of just loneliness and sadness that I think if you showed to anybody, regardless of their taste level, regardless of what they're into, that's a tearjerker moment, So I think as a film that is high art at the same time, it's just so sad and human on such a simple level. Anyway,
I also do appreciate the scene when John Goodman like literally sits him down and just kind of calls him out on all his bullshit. The great line where he says, "You're just a tourist with a typewriter. I actually live here."
Line. I love that
best line. Yeah, it's fantastic, and like that kind of stuff was great for sure. John Goodman plays the character so well. It's like this. There's an innocence and a charm to him, but there's these like
he's
that
so
one,
sweaty.
Yeah. But there's that one shot just before we wrap up here where he's telling Fink to wrestle with him, and they do this like subtle zoom in on his face while he's smiling and kind of egging him on to do it. And there's this thing where it's like you get this this thought in your head where you're like, is this a friendly moment, or is he kind of like, is he egging him on here? Like, if you don't know how it ends, obviously, it kind of puts that question in your brain. So, yeah, it's really well done.
Goodman has always had that thing where he is incredibly like physically imposing and incredibly charismatic at the same time.
Yeah,
and sometimes you don't know what interaction is playing as what yet.
Exactly.
But like, yeah. So if you want a film just like about a really bleak drama about a guy sort of navigating an industry and trying to sort of maintain his sort of artistry through it, and also meeting other people who are feeling as lost and lonely as he is in certain regards, like, you can just watch it for that. And also, if you want a film where the Coens are talking, taking on headier ideas about, the subjective nature of art and illusion and artificiality and the very decrepit industry that produces those things that we mass consume, you can also have that. And I think the genius is that it is absolutely both of those things, and probably why it was one of their films that was like immediately lauded with praise when it came out. Even
works on multiple levels.
Yeah,
there you go.
For sure.
But that being said, we have went long. We are going to wrap it up on Barton Fink here, and we are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Bad Company.
Jake and Drew, They're the best of friends and the worst of enemies. Bad Company from Paramount Pictures.
All right, we are back and we are talking Bad Company, the 1972 American Western film directed by Robert Benton and also starring Jeff Bridges and Barry Brown are the two lead performances in the film. But there are some other cool performances we are going to get to, especially David Huddleston, who I just absolutely loved in this film. But Bad Company, very loosely, is a Civil War era Western. Also, it's a 70s Western, so it's kind of coming a little bit at the tail end of the Western genre when we were seeing more revisionist Westerns at this point, which is what I guess would qualify as, even though it does have a bit of a sweetness aspect to it occasionally that would make it seem a little bit older than it is, which is kind of a cool vibe actually at a certain point.
Yeah, for sure.
But it loosely follows Barry Brown's Drew Dixon, who is kind of a uptight man who is drafted into the Lutheran. Very specific.
I think so. He's a Lutheran, right? Anyway, yeah. I'm sorry. Continue.
Well, he's definitely part of a religious family, and to avoid being drafted into the Civil War, which he had already lost a brother, I think, in the previous draft that they had done, he decides to run away from home. His mom gives him a little bit of money. And he basically spends the rest of the film living a little bit like an outlaw. But after the outlaw phase is kind of like not really cool or done anymore, which is like a really interesting dynamic that they have. And he ends up running into a small gang of kids led by Jeff Bridges, playing a guy named Jake Rumsey, who rob him and mug him in an alley. And he ends up sort of joining up with them because he realizes sort of a little bit of like a strength in numbers. And here are a bunch of kids who also have dodged the draft and are kind of living the only life that he can sort of do, because there is sort of a lawlessness to, I guess, dodging the draft.
I also found it funny that the first kind of image we had was the people hiding. Like one of them was in a dress, I believe. And we recently talked about the Ned Kelly gang film, and I just found that imagery to be quite just a nice coincidence there.
Well, the kid in the beginning, he's dragged out wearing a dress. They throw him in the back of the in the little paddy wagon, and there's all these other kids, and one of them is also in a dress.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. This was a
disguise.
It was a solid tactic that they.
Also, by the way, in Capone, he's wearing a dress at one point. Just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Continue. Sorry.
Beautiful.
That one I didn't catch. I caught the Atlas statue, but that one I missed.
Got him.
We will say that, like, the thing that immediately kind of stood out to me about this film watching it was that it has a very sort of like slow autumn Western vibe to it. I think I was reading Pauline Kael write about it. She called it a slapstick tragicomic. Was kind of like
what the fuck?
Yeah, it was a really weird reaction to it. But it was interesting in that I think that it does have a much lighter tone. It has a very sweet piano melody score to it. We didn't even bring it up, Burwell's score in Barton Fink, but it also has like a very sweet sounding score to it, which kind of captures a bit of Barton's sort of like naive qualities or more like innocent qualities as he's sort of exposed to certain elements, and that is very much what it's used for here.
I also
what's brilliant about the score in this though is that it's very malleable. It's very simple, similar to the Barton Fink score, in that it's just really like a couple of notes. But the way that those notes are able to be used in different octaves is both playful and sad and chaotic. Like there's different variations on those same notes that play throughout the whole movie based on whatever it is going on, and they're all equally powerful.
Yeah, and I also think there's this element where it's showing a world where these kids are kind of used to the violence and used to all the grotesque things that they see. So having that kind of normal score that brings more of a traditional hangout kind of thing is I think makes sense because it's expressing just how used to it they are. Like, for instance, when they go up to two of their buddies after they have like their argument and they steal their horses and stuff, they see that they're hanged from a tree, and it seems like they're obviously sad about it, but there isn't like a huge emotion that they're bringing. It's almost as if they expected that to happen.
There's no giant
it's a better him than us.
Exactly.
And also, may I point out that in this slapstick tragicomedy that is, was rated PG by the 1972 MPAA.
That's fucking crazy.
Features a close-up shot of a child under the age of 10 getting shot in the face with a fucking rifle. Just wanted to point it out.
Yeah, and they also, same with Barton Fink, they don't stray away from the racial slurs at all. So for this to be like, bring your 12-year-old as long as you're accompanied.
1970s, 1970s, the parameters of parental guidance were very loose.
Yeah, apparently. We've even seen some movies where they were like the Beastmaster or whatever it was called, where we were like, there was supposed to be a kid's movie, but they have like full-blown boobs in it and everything, and you're just like, okay.
Yeah, because back then, I mean, also too, we're North Americans over here. In Europe, these ideas are so much different. Right, the ideas of nudity and, if anything, it's more like violence in films is more shunned in Europe than the idea of sort of nudity and things like that.
Yeah.
And somebody actually pointed out to me, a friend of mine from Europe, had pointed out that it's sort of ironic that in a movie like Capone, where there's one implied shit based off of sound design, but one scene where you just see shit for a moment. And the fact that that's what everybody hones in on is the shit, as opposed to the fact that there is a lot of fucking gore in certain parts of the film. Like, that's the thing that people are freaked out about, is more just normal bodily fluids as opposed to obscene violence.
Or like paying $8 to have sex with a guy's wife or something like that, which also happens in this movie.
Yeah, I was immediately struck by the violence in this because the tone doesn't seem to quite have that. Like I had this interesting experience with this because like it is very much, and it's a huge reason of why I think the film works and why I ended up liking it so much was that this has a childlike quality to it. The fact that it's PG, the fact that this is a bunch of sort of impoverished, sort of like lost boys just kind of all on the road, basically sort of just like projecting this sort of like tough cowboy outlaw life. But they have this vision of it where they're like, we can do it. And they talk a lot about how they're going to like, they need to be careful because there's going to be natives on the road on the way there. When it's like, dude, the natives have been kicked out for for a long time since the point that they're doing it. Like they're kind of like play acting as cowboys, which is, and then when they suffer the real consequences of that sort of cowboy action that you would see in, one of the more bleaker Eastwood westerns or something, some of the violence. When they start running into Huddleston, when they run into Huddleston and his gang, that's like they're looking into their future. Yes.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well,
which is, by the way, the meta-ness of Jeff Bridges looking into fucking Dave Huddleston's eyes and seeing the future and the Big Lebowski of it all is just beyond that. That's for that reason alone is why I always tell people about this movie.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Well, and I loved the Huddleston character. He plays Big Joe, and the thing that's so awesome about him is he is an amazing gunslinger, and it's a huge part of his character is that he does all the tricks, he hits all of his shots, he's awesome, but he is just big now. Like it is the idea of like the cowboy actually aging and surviving, and now you're just kind of like this old fat man. And like he still has his skills and everything, but like he's slower, he's wearier, he's like instead of performing a heist on a bank and it's like super amazing, he's just kind of like beating up children in like the middle of a forest and taking like the little scraps that they have.
Not as
and,
cool
like,
as it used to be.
Yeah, like it's just there's nothing cool about it at all, and it's so funny that the kids have this vision of it, that it's like this awesome thing that they can do, and when really they are facing just like the realities of like time and aging and sex and mortality and all of these things, which I also found funny too, because for Jeff Bridges, he would have just been coming off Last Picture Show, which is very similar thematically, and by Peter Bogdanovich. And I it was so funny. I just recently checked that one out, and I also recently, because I actually hadn't seen a Benton film, and I was like, oh my god, Josh Trank is bringing on a Benton film, and I hadn't even seen Kramer versus Kramer, so I also watched that.
Great movie.
Yeah, it is a wonderful film, and the thing that's stuck out about me about that, and especially after watching Bad Company too, you do see that he really likes like this kind of what feels like it should have a lighter surface. It does have a little bit of a comedy angle. It does have a little bit of like in the writing there is raw drama that you feel, but he really likes to hide like very subtle like moral and character complexity like in a kind of lighter surface. And you can also tell that here too with his writing co-partner. It was Newman, you said?
David Newman.
Yeah, because David Newman also wrote Bonnie and Clyde, right? Right. Yeah. So like that is also what I got huge vibes of, because that also for large portions of it kind of has like this warm slice of life hangout vibe to it in a lot of ways, but observed through like a criminal road movie context. And like this has something very similar going on there, and I just thought that it was so well executed, because instead of building like Bonnie and Clyde does to like that moment of like violence, of shocking violence that it kind of like ends on, and you're kind of left with that, and just like life snuffed out is what you're meant to leave with. This indulges in that early, like when that little boy who literally steals a pie off a windowsill, the most cartoonish crime you could possibly fucking
see it.
That is a Looney Tunes crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. and the dude just blows his fucking head off with like, I actually like jumped.
Oh, it's fucking shocking.
Yeah,
it's still,
and then
every time you watch the movie, it's so shocking when that happens. That's the consequence. Mm-hmm. He took the most childish crime, like you said, ever imagined, stealing a fucking cherry pie off of a windowsill, and the consequence is taken to the utmost extreme adult finality you could imagine.
And I love
you get your head shot off.
Yeah, and I love the imagery of it, like the way that they set up, because, you know, they're like poking their heads out of the bushes, just like, you know, it's that very kids on an adventure thing. And then they have that shot right after where they just hold on the kid laying on the ground after trying to steal a pie. And it's just, it's pretty devastating.
Well, also, too, what's, you know, Barry Brown's character, and it's also worth mentioning, which is so sad, is the fact that we never got to see Barry Brown's career continue after that, because he killed himself not too long after.
Wow. I was wondering why I hadn't seen him, because he's very good in this, and I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he killed himself.
Wow.
Yeah, very sad. Very, very sad, obviously.
Was he known for something specifically? Was it
I forget, he was in something. He was in something before that, and I'm not sure if this was his very last movie or if he did something right after this, but yeah, he did not. That was it for him. He what I love about his arc in the film is that he starts off as this very Puritan, Christian, God-fearing young man who's, you know, gives him, you know, $7.50 or whatever, and he's going to go off to Virginia, and has all these ideals about, you know his life and how somebody's supposed to live their life, and then he gets involved with Jeff Bridges and all these, you know, rowdy kids, and goes off on this vagabond petty criminal adventure. And the end of the movie, the final line is, you know, they go into a bank in, you know, the Midwest, and the final line of the movie is him saying "stick 'em up." I cry every fucking time I watch this movie. I cry when he says "stick 'em up," and then it starts playing that bum 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 bum. It's so beautiful and so sad, and it's just it's a heartbreaking arc.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it makes me think, like, when they're playing that music, I just keep thinking about his mom and what she would think, and just kind of this is the reality of life, you know, and this is where life ended up for him.
Yeah, and that's something too. It feels inescapable for his character. It felt like such a natural arc, even with its sadness. It's like you just feel like it had to end there given the circumstance.
Well, because all the slice of life scenes that they show you on the way there, like how else is he supposed to survive? He spends most of the film resisting them, saying things like, "I was not born, or I was not raised that way."
I'm not like you.
Yeah, he talks about not wanting to do anything dishonorable or criminal while literally surviving with like criminal bandits, and like he spends so much time resisting that.
Or even having that scene where like Jeff Bridges is the only one that's capable of like skinning and breaking apart the rabbit, and it seems like they're all kind of sickened by it. And even as Jeff Bridges is doing it, he seems like, oh my God, this is kind of fucking nasty.
Well, yeah, I don't know about you, but my read of that scene was that Jeff Bridges was also doing it for the first time.
Yes, I agree. I think so.
Because it was that same thing of, these kids are puffing up their chests trying to portray themselves as these tough guys, just like when Barry Brown lies in the beginning that he had, robbed that liquor store or whatever the fuck, and he obviously didn't, and Jeff Bridges knew. He'd called him out on it. But yeah, and which also plays into sort of another one of my favorite films, Unforgiven, which is the Schofield kid who had sort of sold himself to Clint Eastwood in the beginning of the movie, that he had like killed these Mexican dudes with his pistol, which is where he got the name the Schofield kid. Yeah. And then he finally, after he kills somebody truly for the first time, and then he tells the truth that I didn't really shoot those Mexicans. I just, hit one of them with a shovel basically and ran.
Right. And like another part that he kind of shows like this bravado or whatever is when when they have sex with the man's wife, like the prostitute, and then he lasts like 15 seconds, and he still comes off afterwards like a total confident smile on his face, and he says something like, "I don't waste no time." It's just like this
15 seconds. It was like 4 seconds. He popped up. He's like, "Whoa!"
I've never seen a man so confident after that amount of time. But yeah, it's just another kind of expression of like their false confidence, this bravado that they're trying to put across, for sure.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and especially when it has them meet the real deal, and they meet this Big Joe played by Huddleston, and he kind of gives them like the way that he talks to Jeff Bridges, and he gets this great line where he says, "If you pull a gun on a man, which happens from time to time out here, you better shoot it a second later, because other men won't be as patient as I am."
So good, so chilling.
Reminds me of that line from The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, where he's like, "If you gotta shoot, don't talk."
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but there's just something also so in the details of the way that's written, that's like, which happens from time to time out here. Like it's at once like he's literally trying to give him a lesson as like someone who has survived doing what he's trying to do or thinks he's doing for like decades.
He's talking to kids.
Yeah, exactly. He's talking
to kids, and he's also letting them know, like, I'm going to be patient with you because you're kids, but I'm not going to treat you any different.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his gang does eventually hang kids and try to murder the kids later in the film.
And Barry Brown and Jeff Bridges give him a fucking run for their money, man. That's a great sequence too, when they're shooting out with them in this swamp.
I love how absolutely messy that fight is. Like, it's so poorly choreographed in the sense that it's like a real, like, two inexperienced people getting lucky in a gunfight kind of deal almost. It's
similar to the way that they blocked the scene when Barry Brown and Bridges are fighting in that house early in the beginning. It's so messy. I love the blocking in this movie.
Yeah, they just basically destroy that set in the bank or wherever they're at the beginning. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I also like too that every single person they come across, because again, these are people, they're dodging the Civil War and they're going west. They're going to live the outlaw life, and every single person they run into is like, man, the West fucking sucks. We're all going the other direction. Where the fuck are you guys going?
Yeah, and it's one of the few movies. I'm a huge just Western fanatic, buff, whatever you want to call me, and it is one of the few movies that. That's the sort of driving point of the film, is that it's not any better out west. It's sad, it's empty, it's depraved.
Yep.
And also too, like, just to sort of draw the parallel back to Barton Fink a little bit, what is so meaningful to me about this film and why I think it's such an interesting movie to kind of, play off of for them to play off of one another, is that they're films that end on such a bleak existential note that you wouldn't necessarily, if you think about, filmmaking and producing films as a form of commerce, like to please a crowd and give them what they want. I always love movies that just take such existential risks with the endings of their films, and you were, is it Jamie, were you talking about metal before, about music? There's something that I think about a lot as it relates to filmmaking, because I like to think about it more in terms of music. And, you can, with music, how much does it really cost to write a song? I mean, or produce a song? Right. It depends. And especially now, like, you can write and produce a song for like nothing and make it sound great. But like, the production cost difference between writing and producing a song even 10, 15 years ago versus making a movie is so different. You need a massive crew, you need a huge budget, you need all this stuff. And because of that, you have less of a diversity and emotional vibe from movies than you do from music. Like in music, it's like not that big of a deal if somebody listens to a song that they don't care for, they can skip to the next song. Right. But when somebody watches a movie that they don't care for, it's a very different thing entirely, because they're thinking so much about like, there's how many resources were required in order to produce this thing, as opposed to, somebody, fucking around on a guitar and singing. But to me, the emotional expression, that's why I feel like movies like these are so important, that they even exist, because it's an anomaly for a movie to exist that isn't made to please a crowd, but it is meant to leave a crowd with a chilly existential feeling of life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's definitely what you get with the end of that too, because even though, again, Benton really likes this thing of sort of like an ironic distance between a little bit of the surface and like some of the content, like it plays that song and it does that freeze frame, and the action that they're doing is like the first time that they feel like, I guess, they're sort of in control. They're doing something cool. They're going in to rob a bank. It's like a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid moment for them, and they feel great. But there is this element of the whole movie that we've seen up until that point is like the ultimate future for anyone, who is partaking in this version of the West anymore that doesn't even really exist. Like, there's no glamour to that. At very best, they are going to end up sort of like old and fat and like showing off the cops who are about to kill them all of their great moves. And they're going to spend most of their time just like robbing and killing like poor and people and children
until they're dead themselves. Yeah, exactly. Like they even have those opening shots where they show a bunch of like younger kids coming together to steal from like an old lady. I think a large group of them steal from adults.
None of the robbing or crimes are cool in this movie at all.
No,
they're completely unglamorous.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is just, it's so funny that the movie ends on like what should be the most glamorous moment, and sort of in the way that they shoot it. I mean, vaguely is, because it is a cool moment of them breaking in and saying stick 'em up, but everything we've seen up until that point so contradicts that you can't
not feel cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's so sad about this.
Really infects that image.
How the movie works as a commentary on movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because like you said, the final moment of the movie is really what we often see as like the cool, common moment of any sort of a Western outlaw type of film. Like
it would be the opening of a cool Western.
Yeah, exactly. And here it's the ending of this sort of sad, bleak tale of childhood gone awry.
Yeah, it almost at points gave me like a Huckleberry Finn kind of vibe.
Oh, for sure. I totally had that vibe. Yeah.
What a great movie. Honestly,
thanks
this
for
is
this one.
Obviously the first time that you'd seen, right?
Yeah. This was the first time. I hadn't even heard of it.
This is one of these movies like I always try to recommend movies like this to people, and not everybody goes to see them. So it's just a joy for me to be able to talk about it with people.
Yeah, it seems really overlooked. It's a shame.
It's such a try to think of a movie that's anything like it, or that says specifically what it says. There really isn't anything like it. It's such a beautiful film, so brilliantly acted, and Gordon Willis's photography is so beautiful. And also, I'm a big road trip guy. I've driven across America at least a dozen times, and I've driven through every state on the mainland, not Alaska or Hawaii. And some of the areas that they go through, like, that's what Kansas looks like. That's what, it's the one of the few Westerns that I've seen where, they kind of pick the sort of more bleak, open landscapes of the Midwest in ways that they, usually those movies opt out of.
Yeah. For sure.
No, I really like this a lot. And pivoting to the reductive rating round, this one definitely gets the high 4 for me, because like I gotta say, like it was really just the unique blend of kind of like that sort of warm, light, sort of childlike tone, because that is obviously the point of view of these kids who are dodging the draft, but just infected by the bleaker elements of a Western genre, and also obviously. At this point, the Western was, sort of going out of style, very much so. So it's also a bit of a genre commentary at the same time, and movie commentary, where they are seeing sort of like these bleaker elements. And not that there weren't like bleak Westerns before this or anything, but it's just a case of seeing that infused with the child's direct realization of like this thing that they glamorized or think was, sort of a mode of existing that would be better than being forced to go to war is almost just as nearly as bleak.
It's almost like the kickoff of American movies that had kids doing fucked up things, like sort of bookended with like The Outsiders.
Right. And I also really liked the back half of the film where it gets into a bit more of a tiff between Jeff Bridges' character and Barry Brown's character, where Jeff Bridges realizes that he's been hiding money from them this whole time that they could have been using, and he decides to join the outlaw gang. And right when he joins the outlaw gang is when that gang gets captured. And so and watching Barry Brown, who was obviously very righteously pissed off at Jeff Bridges for stealing all this money and getting involved in all of this, he still feels more kinship with this young boy who is just lost and alone as him than he does the police, who are also going to be chasing after him once they realize he's a draft dodger. So when he lets him go, and on the promise that there is $1,000 of buried money somewhere, and which he obviously knows is not true, and immediately he calls him out on it once they actually escape. And Jeff Bridges, when he goes, okay, I was lying to you, if you're going to shoot me, just go. And when he goes, no, you are going to pay me back every dollar. And he has that moment of like, it's a tough guy thing to say, where the cowboy would be like, no, I am going to forcefully watch over you while you recollect all my money. But the way that he performs it is such more of like there is a connection here, almost spiritually, like as a friend. This is what's happening, and we're both going to agree that we're going to still keep acting tough. But like the actual sort of emotional expression of that scene is like much deeper than that. And I think that once you have that, and then you have them go and you have them robbing the bank, with the context of all of the sadness and everything we've seen sort of leading up to that.
And for Drew to actually be the one to say, stick him up. Like it's not, I don't believe it's Jeff Bridges' character. Right.
Yeah.
So he's really taking the turn.
Well, if anything, it's the fact that Jeff Bridges was fronting the entire time.
That's true.
Being a tough guy, who was truly the true alpha in that equation is Barry Brown.
Yeah.
Because Barry Brown walked out into the world with a fucking hardcore, but he also, his $7 represented this hardcore moralistic conviction that he stuck onto until the moment the moment when he just like couldn't anymore. Like he had more conviction than any of the rest of those kids. Like he truly was the alpha. He just had a different way of looking at life than them walking into it until he realized that he was just one of them.
Right, because even at the beginning, he has like those journal entries that we get in his inner monologue, where he's like expressing like, I've fallen into some rough types and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I really loved the one after he gets beaten by Jeff Bridges and abandoned, when he says, "I've been robbed of all my money and left to die alone on the prairie."
Yeah,
and I was like, that pretty much expresses what it feels like watching this movie. That is the feeling.
It's such a you got to admit, it's such a beautiful movie.
Oh, Gordon Willis,
it's so beautiful. I just, on such an emotional level, just, when Barry Brown is saying, you're going to pay me back all that money, I'm like, these are the things that I cry at, like, because it's just so, it's the reason why I love movies. It's the reason why I aspire to make movies, is to someday hopefully make a moment like that. Or while I'm writing, randomly find myself inspired to get to a line like that makes sense in that context. That's why we make stories in the first place.
For sure.
Yeah. That moment is great. So, but you go ahead, Jamie.
I'm gonna give this the high 4 out of 5. I really, really enjoyed it. One just last shot or scene I wanted to throw in here was that shot of the guy being hanged off of the horse, and we see like the full hanging and all that. I've just found that to be like technically impressive, because the shot is held really long while that guy is just dangling from the string or from the rope. And I don't know exactly how they did it or what, because it looks very real. But I just thought that was impressive and really expressed like the violence that this time was.
I think I know how. Well, first of all, just say like #1970s.
Yeah.
Second of all, I'm fairly sure that they had some type of like ratchets rigged onto his onto him from the back so that it held up his body.
Okay, yeah. It's very effective, very cool shot.
It's very, oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah. That'll be mine for sure.
100%. Now for you, Josh, we can assume masterpiece, right?
I mean, 10 out of 10, or as my friend Tim Heidecker would say, 5 bags of popcorn.
Yep.
5 bags of popcorn with a couple of those skinned rabbits.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I was just checking my notes, see if I missed anything. One thing I wanted to mention before we head out, pair this with Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. That was what I thought about while watching a little bit too, because also Jeff Bridges, and also you have Eastwood and Jeff Bridges there, and you have Eastwood, the aging heister, who has kind of like seen the worst elements of everything that Jeff Bridges is first starting to get into, and has one of the most tragic conclusions also about the way that lifestyle ends up actually treating these people. And I had just watched it like probably like a few weeks ago or a few months ago, and I've realized that Jeff Bridges is just the best.
Yeah, he's awesome.
That's been the thing.
He is truly
a little late, I guess.
Remember the first time that we all saw the trailer for the new Tron movie? That was just like, bro. Like anytime you throw Jeff Bridges in anything, you're there. Like who isn't there?
Absolutely.
Guys, this has been honestly a real pleasure. Like this is really fun.
Yeah,
like
man.
It's so rare that I could actually kick back and talk about movies that I love and not have to just recount things about Fantastic Four. So thank you for that.
Man, you're welcome.
Honestly, I think I'd love it at some point, maybe in a month or the month after. We should do Big Lebowski and The Late Show, because those are two movies that really weirdly complement each other. And I would just recommend, checking The Late Show out anyway, and just emailing me and letting me know what you think, because I am off of all social media for the next 5 to 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Sounds good. Now, this is usually the part of the show where we have people plug stuff. Now, obviously, everyone go watch Capone on digital release.
Hell yeah.
Exactly. Now, obviously, you probably can't say anything about what you're working on.
Can't, because the answer is I don't even know. I mean, there's like a million things I'm writing and thinking about, and it's hard to say exactly what the right thing will be.
What are you gaming right now?
Well, I think the next thing that I want to do, because there's like 20 different. Honestly, there's like, this is not like me being fanciful, but there's literally about 20 things that I really, really care about and I think about a lot. Mm-hmm. But what I'd really like to do next is something that is just fun. And by fun, I don't know exactly what I mean by fun, because I think Capone is fun, and it's clearly not for some. But I actually want to make something widely fun, and that I think would be an interesting challenge. So, yeah. I don't know. I might fuck around and make a Smash. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I'm excited.
Good. Well, thanks so much for joining us and bringing these films on with you. We absolutely had a blast. But we are gonna, for our listeners, we are gonna be back in 1 week's time. What are we doing, Jamie? What are we? We're doing Last House on a Dead End Street. 1977, right. Roger Watkins taking a left turn. That is not not a nice movie at all. One of the most graphic and uncompromising low budget films made in the 70s. Movie? Last House on a Dead End Street by Roger Watkins.
Yeah, sure.
It's fucking insane.
Yeah, that has a woman being dismembered and screaming, and then they give her smelling salts to wake her back up to continue doing it.
Yeah, that's nice.
Not a great time, but we're also going to be talking about Donald Cammell's The White of the Eye.
Yeah, that was a really, really unique film. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, which is just a very surrealist American giallo almost.
It turns out to be very personal. It seems too
very personal to him as an artist who was very tormented and ended up taking his own life due to artistic compromises by the sounds of it, because someone cut up his film that he did with Christopher Walken.
I know that.
Yeah. Unfortunate. But we are going to be talking about White of the Eye, and it's honestly a genuinely amazing film that I had watched for the first time. So we're going to be excited. That's going to be on the Patreon episode for everyone next week. Again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. But the week after, we're going to be back with a guest, and we are going to be talking about Necromantic 2 and Splatter Naked Blood, which are two films I haven't heard of. They're 70 minutes long. They sound incredibly graphic and disgusting, which is... Yeah,
I'll be listening to that.
So I'm very curious how those play out. But that being said, I think that will wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Keep it or don't keep it sleazy. but for the purposes,
Mr. Trank, sir.
No, but for the purposes of me being a fan of the show, totally keep it sleazy.
Okay. There we go.
But I'm not on record ever saying that. All right, guys. Much love.
Amazing.